The first part of the activity is writing down what your concerns are. And then you can then prioritize the concerns, red being a very high priority, yellow being the next level of priority, and then blue. And then think about also what is not a concern, what has been addressed, what is organized pretty well already. And this will help us with our action plans. So go ahead and get into your tables, and a facilitator will be with you shortly. All right, so now we're going to move on to the second part of the activity. Feel free to continue where you are if it's a fruitful conversation, but start moving in this direction. We have 12 more minutes of the second part. And this direction would be, how would you address or mitigate the concerns you just listed? And this would really help us create an action plan.
Hello, everybody. I'm representing Group 1, and the first thing that we all agreed on is that it was difficult to get out in a timely fashion when we were all leaving or trying to evacuate the Thomas Fire at the same time. So we thought that it would be really helpful if there was an action plan so that certain prioritized at-risk neighborhoods could be released first or could go first. And there were a lot of people that didn't really ultimately have to be stuck in traffic at that moment if their houses weren't in immediate danger. So we thought that an evacuation plan would be, or at least neighborhoods knowing, what general order they're in, if they're like in the top 3 or 4 neighborhoods that should go at a certain time, and then maybe these other neighborhoods can go later. And another thing that came up is that probably illegal burning still happens often around, maybe not the city limits, but outside in the county areas like Oakview and more the rural areas. People still do burning, which may not be safe certain times. So that was a concern and a risk. And then concerned about building density, or how closely the houses are, with a lack of unified community effort to keep, to basically harden the communities with a united effort with neighbors. What we found to be working well is that we all knew that there was a fire and what's happening, but none of us really had guidance on, what to do next, where to go, where you're going to be stuck in traffic, and that sort of thing. And then we found that we were all getting text, or most of us were getting text or information, or could call, and then the power went out, and then your cell phone died, and you couldn't power up your cell phone, and then so those things, it was kind of a double-edged sword, that things were working well. I thought the communication was good, but then because of the power, we couldn't really communicate well. We talked about a comparison catastrophe in 2005 where we had a really bad flood, and there was a localized, like, equestrian group that just had it down, where they could go and get the horses evacuated. And so I put 2 and 2 together, and it's like, well, we had a lot of rain in 2005, and we knew if we had another big rain, it was going to be problematic. So I think we prepared better because of that. So if you relate that to fire conditions, since we live in a hot and dry area, we didn't necessarily think that the whole area was going to go up in flames. Even though we had, some red flag warnings, I didn't think we took them seriously enough as maybe a flood warning. So if we know the humidity level is low and high wind warnings are coming up, or if the electrical companies are threatening to turn your power down, it's probably a good time to start preparing then, like you would prepare if you know it's going to flood, just with the conditions in the dryness, the vegetation, so that more forecasting, so more modeling, I think, could help us prepare as well as we prepared for floods. So I don't want to go on too long. Is there anything, group number one? Well, one of our group members was actually right there, probably within a half mile or a quarter mile of the source, and stuck between Ojai and Santa Paula, and she couldn't go in any direction. And you were stuck there for 3 days, just getting rained on by embers. So she had a much different experience than anybody else in the group. But there are times where she ran into firefighters not knowing how to direct her, because she went one direction, they said go back the other direction, and so I don't know how to plan for that. But that was something that wasn't working very well.
I'm speaking on behalf of Group 2, so please interject if I misrepresent or miss something. So for concerns, there was a lot of conversation about, again, sort of the same concepts that were talked about earlier in the Group 1, but in particular, issues around communication and notification to the public. And this ranged from issues, just being notified that there was an event going on, and then also just all the way through sort of the fire event, not having a lot of information during the fire, and then also after, and sort of like what's the status of particular home or neighborhood. And then we talked a little bit about like information about formal repopulation information maybe not being there either. But along the same lines, when there was communication or information being put out, it was very inconsistent. And I guess Johnny Cash's house burned down 5 times over the course of the event. And then just information not being very timely. So like information coming out that happened, previously, about several hours maybe before. And then also just not being accurate. And then sort of, I guess tied with that could be, oh no, I'll skip that. I'll go back to that. Other obvious issues were just, as probably indicated in the first group, just limited access and egress, which I think is obvious for the valley. And then, that specific information on where to go and what route is available, which I think Group 1 also talked about. There was a concern about just, and I called it hazardous trees or hazardous vegetation, in particular just these flaming fronds flying and igniting homes, and that I sort of put in here that there's this like issue or concern with communal defensible space in that regard. And then there was a comment about there just being a lot of heavy traffic, in particular with people trying to get gas in order to leave the valley. And then some other concerns during sort of after people have evacuated, that there's this obvious worry about security. Everyone's left, there's less policing, and so there's some nefarious activities that could happen, and with people not there, then just worrying about assets in their homes. I guess a major just general concern is just these wind-driven fire events, and then associated with that, just the impacts with climate change associated with those kind of severe conditions. There was a comment about health concerns related to smoke, particularly as people repopulate back in the valley, and the smoke just kind of sitting here because it's a valley, and there just not being this availability of masks. There's also comments about being concerned in general about not just large animals, but all wildlife being impacted, and not necessarily there being a strategy for that, or maybe support for those who are ranchers or that are managing large animals. And then I'm not sure about what what strategies are there for just general wildlife. I think that's it. Did I cover everything?